slavery did not end with the Civil War. Laws were passed making loitering or looking at a white person a crime. African Americans were arrested for these crimes, charged huge court fees, and forced to work off those fees at low wages in the mines and cotton fields. An entire book called Slavery by Another Name has been written documenting this process and era. I learned that racism isn't only individual acts of meanness, but tolerating invisible systems that confer favor and dominance on the white population. I learned about redlining, even in the Twin Cities, that prevented African Americans from buying decent houses that would appreciate in value. Thus, they lost out on the greatest source of family wealth that exists today. What I saw and what I learned on the tour convinced me that even though I had been interested in racial justice for a long time, the problem and issues were much greater than I recognized. And as I read more and watched more documentaries, I came to realize that racism is a North problem as well as a South problem. The tour had many, many activities and highlights, far too many to include here. As a result, I will focus on two aspects that were most memorable to me. The first would be meeting the various foot soldiers of the civil rights marches. These men and women had placed so much hope and optimism in those events and did see some success in that some new laws were passed. Physical segregation and blatant Jim Crow was ended and voting rights were improved. However, 54 years later, Black and white are still living in two separate worlds, and Black and white together has not been fully achieved. In spite of this, the foot soldiers remain optimistic and cheerful in their demeanor.
The big takeaway from this trip for me is that it showed me the need to educate myself in our country's racial history. The foot soldiers' stories were stories of racial injustice I never learned in school or heard in the news. I had started this educational process before the trip, but it definitely escalated that education. I started reading books like White Fragility, The New Jim Crow, Dear Church, Heather Cox Richardson's Substack daily email, Seeing White podcast. I discovered on the trip the hope, forgiveness, and need for reconciliation around racial justice. The trip moved me to keep going, even when it might seem hopeless or I became weary. The trip reminded me our faith calls us to call out racial injustice. I came home and began sharing my insights from the trip on an individual basis. That, quote, "what would Jesus do?" question kept coming to me. I hoped to help the Nativity community see the racial injustice by supporting and helping organize the Nativity Racial Equity and Justice Ministry. A new name, new members, and a new vision and mission help move our group forward. And I just like to share what our mission and vision is. Our vision is we envision racial equity and justice for all God's children. And our mission statement, our mission is to listen, educate, and advocate to recognize and eliminate racism in institutions of society, including our church, community, and country. The Racial Equity and Justice Ministry team at Nativity is organizing educational opportunities, sharing resources. There is a resource list on the Nativity website under our outreach page. We're getting support of our pastors and staff at Nativity. We're finding ways to work for racial justice by participating with a church or an organization that is working on racial justice and systemic racism. Two such organizations we're presently working on are Beacon, which is a housing nonprofit organization, and the Center for Leadership and Neighborhood Engagement with Reverend Kelly Chapman as the CEO. And a final takeaway from me as a white person is Bob and Jeannie Gratz, their stories and their actions. A white pastor and wife who stood with the Black community in their city. It reminds me of the role that white people can play in the work of racial justice. Be an ally.
Overall, I came home with an awesome respect and gratitude for the many Black people and whites who risked their lives to correct the wrongs done to Blacks for many years. I am grateful I had this experience with two great guides, Mark and Leslie, and with the many Black people who shared their experiences and treated us with so much respect, and with the great group of people with whom I traveled.
Jean Voigt wrote, "My understanding of white supremacy and its power and racism has increased exponentially since our civil rights trip. I know I did not create white supremacy, but I have benefited from it my entire life and continue to do so. Recognizing this has been gut-wrenching, but has given me hope that change is possible. I now choose to be part of dismantling racism and the wrongs inflicted on people of color. I hope by changing my perspective, I can influence others to do the same. Right now, my focus is on educating myself through discussion of both books and podcasts about racism, watching videos of leaders in the field of dismantling racism, and participating in Zoom calls to address these issues and share my new knowledge with others. Some are resistant, but most are eager to hear how complacency has emboldened direct and subtle acts of violence against people of color. I know this work is critical for the soul of our country, and I want to be part of the healing process. While some fear continues to hold me back from more direct action with people different than me, I will continue to take steps to accomplish this. We are one human race, and in this together. I am reminded of a quote from Congressman John Lewis. "Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." I want to get in some good trouble.
The civil rights tour we went on was an amazing experience that stays with me. And there are certain impacts that I realized during and after the tour. For one thing, churches can play an important role in protecting and advancing civil rights. Youth activists from the civil rights movement can inspire and activate our youth and us. The right to vote for fair elections is imperative. All voter suppression must be stopped. Education in the civil rights movement is essential. It's interesting and it can lead us in a positive direction. Learn the names of the leaders, learn the stories, research the tenets of the rule of law. Walk, maybe ride, the civil rights trail in person. This is an opportunity that is available to everyone, whether you can go with the Swiggums or not. There's excellent signage if you are in those areas, and you can do this on your own. We highly encourage you to do that.
For a full week, the people we met were almost all Black, and they were all the kind of Christian I want to be. Their lives are God-filled, their hearts are full of love, Their eyes are on the prize of a beloved community. All of this is true, even though they have experienced firsthand the horrors of racist hatred, even though they are surrounded by hateful racists who call themselves Christians, even though their schools and churches and towns and states are as segregated as ever. I felt blood in the soil and hate in the air. Without the connections of the people we met, I think I would have returned filled only with shame and despair. But their spirit and commitment and faith inspired me and made me feel loved because I showed up and listened.